Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Jackson, and I'm with the Environmental Professionals Network in the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State. On behalf of the Sustainability Institute and the School of Environment and Natural Resources, thank you for joining our Ohio State's celebration for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And thank you to the EPN, to my EPN colleague, Joe Campbell, who is here with us behind the scenes and will be advancing the slides for this webinar today.
Now, we know Earth Day is April 22nd. We know we're celebrating with you a week ahead of time. But if there's anything that we've learned in the last few weeks, it's to be flexible and just how comfortable sweatpants can feel.
So just a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started with the webinar here. So everyone will be on mute and we will be showing the slides for the program. So the presentations for the Earth Day component of this program have been pre-recorded, but our speakers are joining us live and will be responding to your questions in the Q&A box, which you can find if you hover over the bottom of your screen. There should be a Q&A box for you to click on to ask your questions during the presentations, and you will be able to also use the chat feature. Again, just click on the chat icon to chat with the panelists as well as the attendees during the program, which will feature or be ongoing during the presentations.
Yeah, just remember, if you have a question, please use the Q&A box. If you want to talk with other participants, please use the chat feature. So Nicole, are we set? Is our special VIP ready? I just wanted to share with the group that I actually had the privilege many years ago of meeting Senator Gaylord Nelson, who was instrumental in founding Earth Day. His daughter, Tia Nelson, ran the climate change department at the Nature Conservancy where I worked at the time. And it was a privilege to meet her. It was a privilege to really kind of learn about his legacy and all he had done to get Earth Day founded. And I don't know if many of you have ever had a chance to interact with Tia Nelson, but very much followed in her father's footsteps, huge champion of Earth Day as a celebration, but also climate change and the need to take action. She's been talking about that and has been a strong voice and advocate for climate change action for many, many years. So we're very excited to have our own announcement on climate action here a little bit later in the program.
As you may know, the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. So it's been in existence for all 50 Earth Days. We asked Dr. Jeff Sharp, director of the school, if he would share a few recollections of how Ohio State has celebrated Earth Day over the last 5 decades. Let's hear from Jeff.
Hello. My name is Jeff Sharp, and I serve as the director of the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State University. As we seek to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, this isn't exactly the event we originally envisioned. But thanks to the great work of our EPN and Sustainability Institute teams, we've managed to adapt and will sustain our 50-year tradition of celebrating Earth Day at Ohio State. As I have reflected on how we've celebrated Earth Day here at OSU, there are 4 important elements to our efforts. We seek to be inspired. We seek to raise awareness and encourage action. We seek to restore, and we do this as a community. Thanks to some sleuthing by former EPN director David Hansman, we found a program from OSU's first Earth Day celebration in the university archives. Highlights from that program include a river walk along the Olentangy River, speeches from 1970 senatorial candidates Robert Taft and John Glenn, and various workshops on pollution, population, and restoration of the environment. The day closed with a poetry reading session at a local coffee house. We've continued to try, inspire, and raise awareness ever since. The EPN, in collaboration with several other organizations, has hosted 7 previous Earth Day signature events, all of which I've found quite moving. My favorites include Joel Sartori, world-renowned photographer and head of the National Geographic Photo Arc Project, photographer Tom Mengelson sharing the story of Bear 399 in Yellowstone National Park, and conservationist Dr. M. Sanjian reporting on the work of Conservation International. As inspiring as it is to hear from these internationally renowned folks, it is actually more inspiring to observe our community's reaction and see how these speakers energize and motivate us to act locally. An iconic aspect to the OSU campus is the Olentangy River. Ever since that river walk the morning of April 22nd, 1970, the Olentangy River has been a centerpiece of Earth Day activity. There have been many cleanups and more recently substantial efforts to remove invasive species. Since its founding in the 1990s, the school has hosted many Earth Day service opportunities at the Shearmire Olentangy River Wetland Research Park, often in collaboration with organizations such as FLOW, the Friends of the Lower Olentangy River, and with the support of Green Columbus. We've also celebrated Earth Day as a community. Many of you who've taken classes in Cottman Hall may recall the Earth Day banner that hung in the main foyer until Cottman was renovated in 2015. That banner was championed by an OSU alumnus and commemorated the 20th anniversary of Earth Day and the students and organizations across campus championing the environment. Another alumnus shared how the banner was added to in 2000, and a great celebration was held by students, staff, and faculty on the Midwest campus. We'd planned to unfurl that banner to hang once again in Cottman this week as part of our celebration and recognition of earlier generations of OSU's environmental champions. We'll manage to do that next year. While we won't be bringing you together physically to celebrate as a community through the reception we had originally planned, it is great to gather with you virtually. I hope you find some inspiration from today's presentations. In closing, Earth Day holds special meaning for many of us, and in these challenging times, I hope all of you in your own way can make a special memory on April 22nd, 2020. Best wishes and good health.
Well, we're very grateful to have had Jeff's presentation. Jeff is head of the School of Environment and Natural Resources, been in that role for many, many years, and they really are a champion and a light for us within the university in terms of environmental conservation, natural resources, and sustainability issues. Before we move on to the next part of our program, I see there's a poll up already for you guys. We just want to get your thoughts in terms of today's themes. What ideally would you have done, or what have you done in the past in terms of Earth Day to celebrate? So please take a moment, share with us your thoughts. Come on, you poets. You're lagging behind. Let's see some more poetry readings. Oh, Bavik raised his hand. All right, Bavik, we're going to have you do some poetry a little bit later in the program. All right, great. Tree plantings, very popular here for us.
We are now going to move on to two perspectives of Earth Day. Our first speaker is Dr. Bart Elmore, an environmental historian in the Department of History in the College of Arts and Sciences. Bart is going to look at the legacy of the last 50 years of the environmental movement with an observant eye of a historian. Don't forget to use the Q&A box during Bart's presentation to ask questions. He pre-recorded his remarks and will be responding to them live. Here's Bart.
Hi everyone, my name is Bart Elmore and I'm an environmental historian here at Ohio State and a core faculty member in the Sustainability Institute. And it's really a privilege and an honor to be able to speak to you all on the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day. And here we are, we're all sitting in our homes without the freedom to be able to interact in large groups or go to our classrooms. And I think it's a moment for us to think about environmental history, just what I do, this studying of humans' relationship with the environment, because there's a real lesson, I think, in this pandemic moment, right? If we don't recognize the ways in which natural adversaries and nature can swiftly transform our lives if we don't act, quickly to address serious natural adversaries that we're facing, then I don't think we're getting the main message of this moment, right? This is a time for us to think about the ways in which we're embedded in this larger ecosystem and the ways in which we have to respect that natural world. And so as we think about the 50th anniversary of Earth Day in this moment of the pandemic, I think there's a lot we can learn. I'm a historian, so I think about the lessons of Earth Day in historical context. And I think it's important for us to go back to 1970 to think about what we can learn about what we can do as a global community when it comes to the big environmental challenges we face in the next 50 years. So let's go back to the past. And if we did, we'd go to 1970. And some of you were saying, please take me back to 1970. That must have been a better time. But the reality is that if we look back to April 22nd of 1970, the first Earth Day, that was a tumultuous time, right? Much like our own moment, there was a lot of anxiety and concern. Remember, the Cold War is underway and we're in this deep battle with the Soviet Union. The Vietnam War is dragging on and on now into the Nixon administration. Young people across the country are demonstrating, trying to protest this war. Just a few weeks after Earth Day, remember at Kent State, the 50th anniversary is coming up of the demonstration that happened at Kent State that resulted in the loss of 4 young people's lives. This was a wild time. In 1968, just 2 years before this, the famed civil rights leader Martin Luther King would have been assassinated. And just months after that, Robert Kennedy, who was running for the Democratic ticket, would also be assassinated. If you were a young person living in that moment, this would have seemed like a world in chaos, a world in crisis. And I think that's much like the moment we live in right now, where there's a great deal of anxiety about the future and what lies ahead. If we think about the people who actually were organizing and mobilizing that first Earth Day movement, many of them, the lead organizers, working under Gaylord Nelson, who was the senator from Wisconsin who helped to think up this event, weren't necessarily environmentalists at the core, that many of them were people who were fighting for anti-war issues or politically mobilized during the campaigns of McCarthy in 1968. They were people, though, who recognized that the environment could be something that brings people together, to bring about transformative change that can really revolutionize our lives. And so, and I think the other lesson of 1970 is that we were the target of that campaign of Earth Day. When Gaylord Nelson, again, this Wisconsin senator, is thinking up who to target and thinking about this massive mobilization, he's thinking about universities. You and I, college students, faculty members, graduate students. He's thinking about universities as these nodes of change. You need to look no further than the date. The whole reason that it's April 22nd is because the idea was that students would be back from spring break. It's also on a Wednesday. April 22nd was on a Wednesday. Why? Because students would be on campus. They wouldn't be distracted by the weekend activities. The idea was that we as a university could be the force that really moves this massive Earth Day movement. And I think it worked. 20 million people came out across the nation. It was about a 10th of the nation's population was mobilized by this, and it was decentralized. Every single institution, universities, communities across the country, there were thousands of localized events planned by people in those communities. And so, wow, it was a pretty remarkable time. And if we look back at some of the events, they weren't just kind of piecemeal events that were designed to just move the dial a little bit. These were radical actions. In Atlanta, for example, during Earth Week, and I should make this clear, it wasn't just Earth Day. What activists realized is that this was an event that had to extend beyond one day. You had to sustain that energy for weeks. And some of the events actually happened in March. leading up to Earth Day. So it was a big event that extended for a very long time. And in Atlanta, some of the activists, young activists, got together and they said, you know, let's work with sanitation workers to try and find Coca-Cola products, cans that were littering the landscape around Atlanta. And the idea was to put those canisters in containers in garbage trucks and actually deliver that garbage truck to the headquarters of Coca-Cola at North Avenue and dump all of that trash on the front steps of Coca-Cola. And the idea being that we're not going to accept this throwaway culture and this pollution that is littering our society. And that was before curbside recycling had really taken off. And the events, I mean, in many ways, they were epic in scale. In Cleveland, you know, just up the road, members of Cleveland State University, including the president of the university, marched with students down the center of the city to the spot where Moses Cleveland had first declared, you know, the city Cleveland in the 18th century, this founder of the city. And when the president arrives at the spot on the Cuyahoga River, he looks at Moses Cleveland, who's being portrayed by an actor, and he says, you know, we apologize for the condition of the stream. And Cleveland, in kind of dejected fashion, just turns his head down and moves on. The idea is that, you know, this place is so polluted, how could it be that you could let it get this way? So it was epic in scale. The demonstrations were meant to be provocative and to provoke change, and it did. You know, if we look at the lasting impacts of this moment, it changed the game. You know, Richard Nixon, who was a limited government, small government conservative, when we think about the Republican president in the White House, who by executive order creates for the first time the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. We can see, in other words, that this crossed political boundaries, that it moves people on all sides of the aisle to do big things. The EPA would be created. The Clean Air Act would be passed. Soon after that, the Clean Water Act, which would clean up our streams and restore places like the Cuyahoga. The Endangered Species Act, which he passed in 1973. The scale of change and the ways in which it improved our environment are truly astounding when we look back at that moment and the immediate repercussions of that Earth Day. So here we are, we're 50 years from that moment, and the question becomes, what do we do? What is our obligation to this moment? And when we think about next week, April 22nd, we know that there aren't going to be people in the street, and that people aren't going to be congregating in large numbers. And they shouldn't, right? I mean, if we think about this moment, this is a time where we have to come together and stay away from one another and have social distancing. But I think if we miss this opportunity to use the 50th anniversary of Earth Day to think about big transformative change, then we're really missing an opportunity. This pandemic will subside, and when it does, I think we as a university community can commit ourselves to big transformative change. And what would that look like? As an environmental historian, what's the one thing I think we could focus on as a university community here at Ohio State University, a university that I love? What can we do to make a big difference? And I think the one thing a historian would say is we've got to get off our deep dependency on fossil fuels. And I mean that as an institution, right? We can be this node, as Gaylord Nelson knew, of moving people to do big things. You know, when I first arrived here at the university, I think it was President Drake who looked out at us as new faculty and told us, you know, that any given day on campus, there were about 100,000 people bustling around the university. And I remember thinking that, man, it was so alive, right? It felt like a city every single day you're there. And I think all of us miss that, right? That energy that's there. But it's true, we're like a small city. And the choices we make as a university can have profound impacts around the world. And as a historian, again, we look at this fossil fuel dependency. It's quite tragic, right? We're at a moment where, if you look at that historical record, we're scraping deeper and more desperately for the last reserves we can find of these fossil fuels, right? We're going deeper into deep water oil drills into the ocean. We're going down to as far down as we can go into the ground to access these fracking seams that we can find. We're leveling Appalachian mountains that are, by the way, over 360 million years old to finally get that last that last seam of coal. This is desperate actions. It's billed as we're finding freedom. We're gaining a certain degree of freedom. And for the moment, it seems like we're doing okay, right? We've got access to this stuff. But the reality is this is a deep dependency on a dead economy, literally a dead economy. These are fossils. These are creatures that died millions of years ago that we are dependent upon for deciding the fate of our economy. We can be a force for change at OSU University. We can make bold decisions about moving towards renewable energy, about figuring out how we can divest from certain fossil fuel investments, something that OSU students have been calling for here at the university, and that students at Harvard and Yale and Dayton, University of Dayton, have already pushed for in many ways. But we, as this big institution, can move the dial. We make those choices. We can be a force for curbing this climate crisis that we're facing and dealing with it. Some people say, why do you get so motivated by all this? And what is it that drives you to talk about all this? And I'm going to share an image because I can't not do so. This is my inspiration for sharing this information with you. This is my son. He's 2.5 years old right now, and making it through this pandemic. And he doesn't have the words to say, fight for me, right? Fight for my generation that's going to come and be adults 30, 40 years from now. They don't, there's a whole generation of folks that do not have the words, literally cannot speak to tell people what is needed to be done. And so I think it's up to us as a university community to come together to make those bold choices that will make a difference down the road. I'm honored to be here as an Ohio State University Buckeye to talk about this. I'm excited about this 50th anniversary because I think it could be a chance for us to move the dial, and I hope we do so. I hope everyone stays safe, and we'll see everyone soon back on the Oval.
That was
wonderful.
Great look back. That was great, Nicole. That was really, really wonderful. Bart, thank you so much. I especially enjoyed hearing about what the first Earth Day was like with all those celebrations in all those different places. And geez, depending on how much longer the social distancing lasts, Nicole, I may be celebrating 1970 all over again with my hair. So it won't come to that. Just so folks on the phone or on the presentation know, the Q&A box will remain open. Bart's on the line. If you think of something after the fact and you want to ask him, please go ahead, ask the question. Bart would love to hear from you. Now, I asked Nicole if I could introduce our next speaker because our next speaker is my boss at the Sustainability Institute. Dr. Elena Irwin is the faculty director of the Sustainability Institute. She's also a distinguished professor in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Developmental Economics in the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences. She's going to draw on her experience as an economist who studied both sustainability and resiliency issues to give us a little glimpse of what may lie ahead. Just like Bart, Elena has pre-recorded her presentation so that she can monitor the Q&A box and respond to your questions. So let's hear from Elena.
Hello, my name is Elena Irwin, and I am the faculty director for the Sustainability Institute here at Ohio State University. I'm also a distinguished professor of food, agricultural, and environmental sciences in economics and sustainability. Bart just gave us an amazing tour de force of what it was like to be back in 1970 at the first Earth Day. And what a remarkable time that was, a hard time. And he reminded us of the amazing accomplishments and progress that we were able to make as part of Earth Day 1970. Now, granted, Bart had the benefit of knowing what has actually happened in the last 50 years. And perhaps my task is a bit more difficult to predict what might happen in the next 50 years as part of Earth Day 2070. Unfortunately, there is no crystal ball. But what we do know is that the existential crisis that we are facing today is climate change and the irreversible and massive and radical destruction of our planet as a result of that. Thanks to the incredible work of climate scientists, including those here at Bird Polar and Climate Research Center, we know quite a lot about how the climate has changed and the impacts that the climate has had on biodiversity in ecosystems, oceans, polar regions, and other systems. The evidence is compounding, and we experience these effects worldwide on an increasingly regular basis. I think just in the last 12 months, the fires in California, the Amazon, Siberian, Arctic, Australia. It's difficult to comprehend that at least 1 billion animals were burned to death in Australia. It's the science that informs our targets of climate change reduction, climate emissions reduction in terms of CO2 emission reductions set by the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, to reduce global net human-caused emissions of carbon dioxide from 2010 levels by about 45% by 2030. In other words, to cut them in half in the next 10 years, and to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Despite great strides in our science, there's still many unknowns. What happens in 50 years from now really depends on the choices we make today as individuals and collectively as businesses, organizations, institutions, and society. And it's just hard to predict what we as humans, what we people are going to do. And of course, there's also the unknown unknowns that we will face. But we can use scenario analysis to help envision the future and understand how the choices and policies that we put in place today will affect our options and our outcomes in the future. Scenario analysis is a scientific method that projects plausible futures using knowledge and models that we have to characterize how the climate might evolve, as well as demographic, social, political, economic, and technological conditions. By specifying different conditions, we can predict different futures using these models. And for each set of conditions, we can define a baseline and compare it to alternatives based on different alternative policies that we might consider enacting. So, drawing on this work, I am going to transport ourselves to Earth Day 2070, 50 years from now, and describe to you 3 very different worlds, each of which is possible, depending on which policies we decide to make today and in the next 10 years. Those 3 worlds are, first, a world that is business as usual, in which we basically continue down the same path we're going, and we blow right past the IPCC climate targets. 2 alternative worlds, both in which we do meet the 2050 target of net zero emissions, but in ways that are quite different and imply different trade-offs. So first, business as usual, or what some might call sleepwalking our way into the future. We continued on the pre-2020 path that we were on. We've seen some pretty amazing technological innovations. Autonomous vehicles are now the norm. We've made real progress in energy efficiency and battery storage technologies, allowing for a greater proportion of renewables integrated into the grid. However, we still don't have a globally coordinated approach to emissions reduction. Some countries and companies have been successful in meeting some pretty ambitious targets, but overall, global progress has been haphazard. Growth and prosperity are highly uneven. The world is starkly divided along lines of climate risk. But all communities, rich and poor, are severely challenged by the consequences of climate change. The difference is that the rich ones are much better able to protect themselves. Many of us are unable to breathe the air when we go outside our house without a mask. That's true of me living in Columbus in the summertime. And we can't keep up with the intensity and frequency of extreme storms and flooding. As a nation, economic damages from climate change total about 10% of our GDP annually. Rising sea levels have wiped out cities and regions across the world. All of South Vietnam, parts of Thailand, India are gone. On the other hand, vast parts of North Africa, Australia, Western US have been rendered practically uninhabitable because of temperature increases and extremes and lack of water. Back in the 20s, we thought we were well on our way to eradicating extreme poverty and hunger. With all these climate impacts, we have 100 million more people living in extreme poverty and many more who are food insecure. The massive amount of forced migration is at a level that was just unimaginable before. All these changes led to new diseases being unleashed. Looking back, the coronavirus pandemic in 2020 was mild in comparison. World number 2, the global techno-economy. This is a highly globalized world with tightly integrated markets and rapid technological progress. We've put our faith in competitive markets and innovation. It took us a while to get going in terms of meeting the climate targets. We focused first on capital investments in private and public R&D. The motto of our times, there are no jobs and no customers on a dead planet. Although we've continued to rely quite a lot on fossil fuels, we've been able to pursue aggressive economic growth. We've lifted many out of poverty, many millions, and greatly increased access to healthcare and education around the world. However, it's also resulted in a much higher proportion of people with carbon-intensive lifestyles. As a result, we blew past the 2030 target of cutting emissions in half, but we did manage to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 through renewables and massive scaling of negative emissions technologies. Geoengineering has tempered some of the impacts of climate change. We got lucky with some moonshots, and it's admittedly a risky strategy. It's not a substitute for international cooperation, and there's considerable concern that we may shoot past our goal of limiting average temperature increases to 1.5 degree Fahrenheit by 2100 relative to pre-industrial levels. We've pushed past some of the really critical climate tipping points. The coral reefs collapsed, and Arctic summers have been mostly ice-free for the last several decades. We just hope we can adapt by maintaining strong economic growth, keeping people out of poverty, and investing in highly engineered infrastructure. World number 3, ecological balance. It turns out that in this world, the coronavirus pandemic of 2020 spurred the world into action. People were simply unable to comprehend what it meant before when scientists warned of a massive global threat. In that case, it was just a single event, but it revealed the vulnerabilities of our systems and how fragile and brittle they really were. It brought the world closer together, and luckily we were able to seize the moment. People started to understand that climate change is so much more than a single catastrophic event. It's a forcing function that fundamentally and irreversibly alters our systems. It leads to many catastrophic events that cascade and multiply. With climate change, there is no bouncing back. And so we've tried to find ways to bounce forward. The world started to come together, led by international organizations, NGOs, citizens, and the private sector, spurred by forward-looking asset management firms who saw liabilities of high carbon operations and products. Corporations, large and small, set aggressive emissions targets, and within a few years, all countries had recommitted themselves to the Paris Agreement. The world shifted gradually, but pervasively, towards a more sustainable path. We met the 2030 target of cutting our emissions in half. Rich countries made deep cuts and shared new low carbon technologies with developing countries. We've had global carbon markets for many decades now. We're fully decarbonized the electricity sector by 2050, and renewables have been the world's dominant energy source since about that time as well. With land-based emission pricing, agriculture has shifted to more sustainable practices. But all these constraints have come at a cost. The economy of some regions has stagnated and is declining, and there are spillovers to other regions. And while the air is certainly more breathable and more people have access to clean water, other social inequities remain. Sub-Saharan Africa has still over a quarter of its population living in extreme poverty. Other countries have strong social safety nets, but just aren't sure how much longer they can maintain them. We took a safety-first approach, and we did all we could to bend the emissions curve, but we sacrificed a lot in the future in the process, and we are struggling to create a shared prosperity for all. Which elements of these possible futures might transpire? We don't know. But we do know that to be on a sustainable path, we cannot wait. We have to act now and take steps now as individuals, as organizations, as businesses to determine which of these 50-year paths we will choose to take. And the very good news is this: we have the technologies, we have the accumulated capital, we know the policies, we have all the levers in place that it takes to make the choices that we know we need to make. And we have the science, we have the knowledge of the earth and environmental and human systems. Here at Ohio State, scientists and scholars are playing a leading role in sustainability research, including developing climate assessments and policy, documenting the impacts of on ecosystems, pioneering integrated models of natural and human systems, helping us to better understand behavioral science and decision-making, innovating engineering for environmental health and resource efficiency, articulating how and why social justice and equity matter for all. Ohio State is an amazing place with committed scholars, students, staff who don't want to just study the problem, they want to do something about it as well. And so we're doing our part with an aggressive climate action plan. And we're also joining with partners to make sure the research is translated and used for sustainability solutions. I'd like to conclude with a note about optimism. We have to be realistic about the challenges, but at the same time, undaunted. We need to accept the grim realities of climate change and know that bouncing back is not going to be possible. And so we have to figure out a way to bounce forward. And for this, we need optimism. It's not a naive optimism. It's a stubborn optimism, born out of necessity. There is no other answer. In the wise words of Christina Figueres, former executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, it is only if we start with optimism and inject the entire process with confidence, with trust, and the radical collaboration that comes with it, that we can move forward. Thank you.
So Elena gave us quite a bit to think about, and apparently a look at her time traveling jacket. But one clear message came out of her remarks, and that is that we need to take action, and we need to take action soon. And with respect to climate change, the next decade is going to be extremely important. And that's why we're very excited by a special announcement that we want to share with all of you. And by the way, you are the first group to be hearing this publicly. It's the Climate Action Plan by Ohio State University. Unfortunately, Dr. Drake continues to have technical problems and is unable to join us to give the announcement himself. And he is very disappointed that he won't be able to join you to share this announcement. But I think all of you understand this is a very unusual time for everybody. And we would have loved to have had this Earth Day event in person at the Student Union to be able to celebrate with you and to share in the camaraderie of the moment. But unfortunately, we're in a different moment in time than we all expected. And we were talking before this webinar started, and we all agreed that doing something to celebrate and acknowledge Earth Day, despite all the technical difficulties, despite all the video that might be a little choppy to watch, was more important than not marking the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for being with us. And now here's a super special announcement that we want to share with all of you. So this is what Dr. Drake would have liked to have shared with you in terms of what Ohio State is doing on climate change. Global climate change presents a clear threat to many communities around the globe. Climatologists, including those at Ohio State's own Berg Polar and Climate Research Center, have demonstrated the negative impacts that we are already experiencing as a result of climate change. These impacts, such as increased storm-induced flooding and more sustained hot days, will disproportionately affect those who have the least resources to deal with them. Sorry. In that sense, climate change is not only an environmental challenge, but a very real human challenge. To that end, Ohio State is committed to take actions that advance scientific knowledge, social understanding, and model operational techniques that will propel new solutions to climate change. Over a decade ago, Ohio State took leadership on this issue by establishing a goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Soon after, we issued our first university climate action plan, outlining how we could begin to make progress toward that goal. This included things like establishing an extensive geothermal well field that provides all of the cooling and 90% of the heating to the South Campus student residence halls at our Columbus campus, and a wind energy agreement that supplies 14% of our overall energy use. In fact, Ohio State has reduced its carbon emissions by over 15% since our first climate action plan, while still expanding the amount of built spaces on campus to deliver our academic programming by nearly 11%. Now that's just remarkable. Cutting our energy use while growing our campus. That said, there's still a lot of work to be done. And that is why today, in recognition of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we are so pleased to announce and release Ohio State's new climate action plan. While this plan contains input from many people on our campus, I want to specifically recognize a few individuals. First, I want to thank Professor Bobay and his Ph.D. student, Michael Charles, for doing much of the initial work. Second, we want to thank my colleague, Mike Shelton, in the Sustainability Institute for the work that he did to help refine the plan. And finally, we want to underscore how important our partnership with NG Axioma is and will be to implement this plan. Special thanks to Sadar Tafexi for those efforts. The plan we're releasing today details a series of actions that, when taken together, would address and reduce 55% of Ohio State's carbon emissions by 2030. That pace of activity exceeds what the International Panel on Climate Change has recommended is necessary to avoid the most acute human impacts on climate change. These actions include improving building efficiency, diversifying our sources of energy, and addressing transportation-related emissions. Addressing our carbon emissions sooner, closer to the 2030 goal, allows the university to get in front of the growing climate change threat and minimize the negative environmental, social, and economic impacts over time. It also helps us to ensure a bright future for generations of students to come. The students of Ohio State give all of us so much hope on so many levels. As future leaders, they desire to be engaged in the large, challenging issues of our time, including climate change, and we're committed to living up to their expectations for all of us and being part of the solution. I think with that in mind, we'd like to go ahead and segue into a video prepared by a number of our students to share some of what their aspirations are on this 50th anniversary, and talking a little bit about the threat of climate change and how they personally are trying to take action.
Welcome everyone. My name is Jayson Velazquez, and I'm currently a third-year student here at The Ohio State University, majoring in environment, economy, development, and sustainability. I would like to start off by acknowledging that today I am presenting from Columbus, Ohio, a site that has long served as a place of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, specifically the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandotte, and Delaware Nation. It is important that we honor and respect these diverse Indigenous peoples connected to the territory on which I am presenting today. My climate action journey here at Ohio State has been fairly decorated, spanning from recycling and waste education to engaging with nonprofits in the Columbus community that have focused on food security and youth development. All of which to say I have gained experience and a vast knowledge base during my time here, and I cannot wait to take everything I've learned back home to my hometown of Paterson, New Jersey. Oftentimes in climate change and sustainability related conversations, we hear about the 4 Ps of people, planet, profit, and purpose, where sustainability lies at the intersection of all 4. Today, I would like to shine light on what I consider to be the 4 Cs of climate action: challenge, change, community, and commitment. Starting off with challenge, climate action is challenging. There is no singular way to achieve the goals we've outlined for ourselves, our institutions, or our communities. It takes a multitude of individual and collective actions to tackle what lies beneath us and what lies ahead. It is important that our individual climate action efforts, we use those to challenge the status quo, challenge those around us, and challenge those who represent us. Change. If we have access and are able to change our individual consumption habits, we absolutely should. I also urge everyone to think of this change as our place in larger climate action movements. We should be asking ourselves, how can we advocate for change that benefits those who are most vulnerable in the wake of climate change? How will we enact change so those who are often left out of these conversations have equitable access and the ability to make the changes that they seek for themselves? How can we inspire those around us to do the same? Community. Community is none without compassion and commitment to responsible care and respectful actions for our environment and those around us. Climate action movements are rooted in the ideals of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and it is important that we intentionally amplify the voices who have been engaging in climate action work and to put the stop to the erasure of these faces and voices. Commitment. Climate action is not a sprint, but instead a series of lifelong marathons spanning multiple generations, and are ultimately ones that cannot be run without the power of challenge, change, community, and compassion. Climate action takes commitment to yourself, your community, and to change day in and day out. It is committing to take actions at all times, not just when it's convenient. I want to leave you all with one last message here this evening. There is no one single way to engage in climate action. Together, we must accept these challenges by enacting changes within our communities and committing to do so consistently. We are made one community in compassion, and together we must make sure that each step in our climate action journey is one full of intent and commitment. Up next, we'll hear from 3 students who are already taking action to reduce their climate footprint. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the program.
My name is Luke Bobay. I'm majoring in environmental science and evolution and ecology. I'm recording from Columbus, Ohio, and I'm participating in research at OSU's Aquatic Ecology Lab that explores the potential impacts of climate change on early life stages of yellow perch in Lake Erie. And I'm the current president of the student chapter of the Sierra Club at OSU. So climate change is having countless consequences worldwide, but I've personally put a lot of time into exploring the potential ecological impacts of climate change. And so the temperature changes that we're currently on track for will probably have dramatic impacts for species around the world, including reductions in distribution, abundance, and biodiversity. Because of the many ways that we depend on ecosystems, these ecological impacts of climate change will probably have severe consequences for people. In the United States, the per capita carbon footprint is about 5 times the global average. So because most individuals in the United States contribute disproportionately to climate change, it's particularly important for us to reduce our climate footprint to minimize the impacts of climate change on people and on ecosystems around the world.
Hi, my name is Dominique Hadad, and I'm a 4th year at Ohio State studying industrial systems and engineering. I've been involved with Time for Change Week at Ohio State, as well as undergraduate student government with their sustainability committee, and I'm recording today from Columbus, Ohio. So I think that the most important action we can be taking is listening. I think this applies to students, to leaders, administrators, all the above. I think that listening is so important because our world is always changing. The needs of everybody, the role they're playing is going to keep shifting. So once I think we have listened and we have learned from our environment, then I think that awareness piece comes in. I think now we're aware of how our actions are affecting others from within our community to outside of our communities. And then I think that follows awareness is intention, and being able to choose our actions intentionally, looking at our behaviors and making decisions with an intention about the effect it's going to have elsewhere.
My name is Christina Gore, and I'm reporting from Columbus. And I am a third-year Ph.D. student studying environmental economics. And my research focuses on interdisciplinary research surrounding sustainability of transportation systems. I hope that the 100th anniversary of Earth Day is more of a celebration of past accomplishments rather than a call to action. So currently, Earth Day is very much so a call to action to everything that we need to accomplish in order to save the Earth. However, I hope that 100 years from now, it's more of us looking back at the past actions and past successes we've had and celebrating those accomplishments.
That was great. And with all due respect to Jeff and Bart and Elena, I just noticed the chat started to light up once Jayson started, and then Luke, and then Dominique, and then Christina. So, you know, students are just a very special part of our community here at Ohio State, and they certainly are the face of the future of Earth Day. So we were delighted that they were willing to join us and share their comments. We had hoped to do it in person, but so good to get that and so inspiring. We've got one more poll for you, one more poll, and then we're going to be wrapping up here in a second. We'd love to hear from you what type of action you might take as a result of listening to today's program. We're going to just go ahead and have that up there for a second or two.
I actually want to say give a thank you to Matt Griffith for helping me put those videos together of Jayson, Luke, Dominique, and Christina. They did a wonderful job.
They sure did. That was beautiful. We'll give it a couple more seconds here. Looks like people are voting quickly. Thank you. Okay. Quite a lot of action people are going to be taking. That's fantastic. So before Nicole closes out our program, I know a few of you may be interested in knowing where can you get a copy of the full climate action plan for Ohio State. I know I just gave you a few of the highlights, especially the goal over the next 10 years to reduce and address 55% of our carbon emissions. But there's a lot more in it. There's a lot of details in it. You can find it at one of our 2 Earth Day resources on the screen right now. si.osu.edu/Earth Day 2020. You'll find Ohio State's climate action plan. And because, you know, Ohio State is made up of so many individuals, we've also put on that website a list of tips that individuals can do to reduce their own carbon footprint. So check that out. Hopefully you'll find both of those resources useful.
All right, so again, thank you everybody for joining in. We had over 300 participants show up throughout the program. This has turned out really great, and we had some wonderful, wonderful speakers. Great message for Earth Day. I just want to thank you all so much for joining the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. We hope you've done our job. We hope we've done our job as the land-grant university that is celebrating its 150th anniversary to educate, engage, and inspire, to inspire you. Be sure to check out our Earth Day webpage for the School of Environment and Natural Resources at go.osu.edu/50, so that's 50 years Earth Day. Visitors will get a glimpse of some of the Earth Day activities our students, faculty, and staff have led or been involved in. It also includes past EPN signature events and the story behind the Earth Day banner, which was on display in Cottman for many years. On behalf of the Sustainability Institute and the School of Environment and Natural Resources, stay safe and happy Earth Day. Thank you all again.
Happy Earth Day, everyone. Bye-bye.